Hello, this is Matthew here from the Nations of Sanity project. I'm here for part 3 of my discussion with Urza from Free Haven. We have 2 previous discussions, which I'll put links in the description for if you want to check those out. And we're just basically continuing our conversation about voluntarism and anarchism and self-ownership and all the concepts we're involved with. So I'll pass it over to Urza to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. As Matthew said, I'm Urza from the Free Haven project, and I'm happy to have this conversation with Matthew. I'm happy that we are doing third part already. I just want to tell you that English is not my native language, and it's a bit I am a bit out of my comfort zone by talking in English, but I really want to do it, and the only way how to learn it is just to do it. So I'm happy that I have this opportunity and I can talk to you because it's for me really nice that I have done a lot of conversation in my native language in Czech Republic, and in the future I would maybe like to also talk to the people who are not from Czech Republic. So I suppose that the English is the only way how to do that.
It does seem to be the universal language. So I'm not sure where to really to start. I mean, anyone who's listened to our previous conversations, we covered quite a lot of topics about things like land ownership and also just to catch anybody up. I mean, obviously, we both kind of represent roughly the same thing. Like, we're both represent like the concepts of self-ownership and property rights, and obviously you do it under the banner of anarcho-capitalism. I prefer the banner voluntarism, but for most people they're kind of the same thing, or at least similar and compatible. We have spoken about
areas as anarcho-capitalist and also as voluntarist. So
exactly, yeah. So and we've spoken about like some of like the slight differences and that. I mean, obviously the Nations of Sanity project that I represent has a very specific idea about saying that we should, establish the non-aggression principle as the law through a peace agreement, making it like the terms of peace between all people. So I suppose that's a very kind of specific idea that's kind of somewhat unique to the Nations of Sanity project, as opposed to just sort of anarcho-capitalism or voluntarism in general, which obviously advocates that we respect the non-aggression principle, but doesn't necessarily say specifically we should be putting it as law or making a peace agreement or any of those specific things that I propose. And obviously we've spoken about some of the pros and cons and arguments for and against that specific idea. So perhaps we could get into some of that a bit more as well. We've also spoken about things like land ownership and our conceptualization of property rights. So yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of good ground already, and I would definitely encourage people to check out our previous conversations. But just to kick off into this one, did you have a specific subject you want to kick off on, or should we just kind of continue what we were talking about with regards to the kind of idea of establishing
I think we can continue. You said you have there some things to the topics we already discussed, so you can mention them, or we can continue in that, because I don't think I have anything specific to what we already talked about. So I will leave it up to you. Then I have maybe one topic. We will see if we will get to it or not, but it's another topic and it's not so much related to this what we already opened.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, well, like I say, I mean, the idea about, because obviously you gave some pushback with regards to whether we really can establish like universal peace agreement based on the non-aggression principle, because obviously there is the issue of differing interpretations, and even you and I have had disagreements over, for example, the concept of voluntary slavery. Mm-hmm. So if we've got two people that are both pretty much on the same page over the non-aggression principle in a kind of low resolution way, but still have these areas of disagreement over more specific interpretations, then that obviously illuminates the fact that among the wider population, there's probably going to be even more disagreements over differing interpretations. I I mean, I suppose from my point of view, I'm still in my corner, so to speak, with regards to like, you know, you haven't convinced me to abandon that idea, because I do, even though I do fully accept and agree, as is evidenced by our own disagreement on voluntary slavery, that there is these areas of differing interpretations, and these kind of the grey area, if you like, can be kind of expanded quite a lot. I do still think that not only do I think that it is possible for us to kind of create a universal interpretation, even if it's kind of low resolution and kind of works on the basis of like certainty, where we kind of all agree to operate under a basis of kind of reasonable certainty and not enforce what we would agree is the grey areas. I understand that we might not even agree what is grey and what is black and white, but I do think that if we at least agree on that approach, then that gets us a lot of the way there. And the other thing as well, the other reason why I'm kind of still in that corner is, as much as I think it will be difficult and there will be like arguments and disagreements over like these grey areas and fuzzy edges, I do think we still need that that agreement, because in the absence of it, I mean, I was thinking about this a lot since our last conversation, but like in the absence of having that peace agreement, or even with that peace agreement, we have the problem, like, let's say we live in an anarcho-capitalist society, or the more specifically, the Nations of Sanity idea with this peace agreement. Either way, it doesn't matter which version we have, whether it's what you're talking about or what I'm talking about, they're both pretty similar. But let's say we live in those worlds, and then we actually have a situation where our disagreement over voluntary slavery, for example, becomes an issue. Let's say you run a NAP enforcement agency and I run a NAP enforcement agency, and for the most part we can agree, because, you know, for the most part the NAP is relatively clear cut, but because we have this different opinion on the idea of voluntary slavery, and just to give people a quick idea, I don't think you can voluntarily make yourself a slave, because I don't think you can sell your self ownership, whereas your assertion is that you can. In that situation, there is a potential for violent conflict, because if say, for example, there was somebody who quote unquote sold himself into slavery by signing a contract and then didn't want to go through with that, but there were people trying to enforce that on him, he may come to me saying, please rescue from these people that are trying to enslave me, and the other party may come to you and say, please, can you enforce this contract, because this person is in violation of it and he's now my property, but he won't come back, you know. In that situation, there would be a violent conflict between us or our enforcement organizations, because we have this different interpretation of the non-aggression principle. So even though we're both enforcing the non-aggression principle according to our understanding of it, we would still have a potential conflict there. Now, from my point of view, what I would say, or how I would say that should be dealt with under the Nations of Sanity project, and this, I appreciate this isn't perfect, but I think this is like the best we could do, is we would take this approach of kind of reasonable certainty, where basically, and if we're both in a position where we're both, you know, still in that position of saying reasonable certainty, then it would mean conflict. It would mean that, you know, if I'm adamant that no, this person is definitely not this other person's property, and the contract that he signed cannot be enforced, it's like, you know, invalid or whatever, and I'm prepared to fight to defend his liberty as I see it, and your organization is prepared to fight to enforce the contract, where would you see that? How would you see that situation playing out, either in the Nations of Sanity situation or a more looser anarcho-capitalism?
Well, this is something where I like to talk with you, because as you talk, I have a lot of things to react to, and I see there are two very important points. I would go it one after the other. The first thing is that you were talking about voluntary slavery, that you are not agreeing with it. I agree with it. But as I remember our last conversation, I thought that we agreed that you can sign that contract and it's even valid, just you are not calling it slavery, and I do. But if I remember correct what we agreed the last time, I suppose that we both would agree that if somebody would sign a contract, that he would, according to that contract, he is selling his body to the other person, and in the contract there is something like that he would that the like slave, so-called, would be doing whatever the master say, and it would be voluntary contract with no coercion, and he would really sign it like voluntarily because he wanted to. I suppose I thought that we agreed that this is this should be allowed to anybody, because I think that for me this is very important part of the freedom, like that if I own myself, I can also sell myself. I can give up on this ownership, because I think this is very important point of ownership. Not like it would be the thing what people would commonly do. I don't think that it's smart to do that. I don't think it's good to do that, and I don't think it would be normal to do it. I don't think this would be common thing. I think it's good to say that, because I don't want people who would accidentally listen this and didn't know anarcho-capitalism or voluntarism that we are like slaverists. But I think that the part of freedom is that I can do whatever I want with my body, including ending my life, including selling my body, and so on. However, I thought that we agreed that you can do it, and this contract would be valid, and this contract would be okay, and this contract would be according to the non-aggression principle. I just thought that you said that this is not true slavery, because in like true slavery, the person would even sell something like his self, not just the body, but even the soul, let's say. And I agree that it is not possible to do. You can't sell a soul or yourself, but I suppose you can sell your body. And I thought that we agreed on this, and the only disagreement between us was that I was calling it slavery and you weren't calling it slavery. Did I understood it correct or not?
For the most part, I mean, yeah, there is the issue of obviously if you, yeah, I mean, I consider a slave as someone who's against their will, you know, being sold as property. But also, just to the point you said about, because I suppose for me, it's harder to draw a fine line between the self, you know, like including things like the soul and intangible aspects of the self, and the body. Like you know, like you could argue that I sell my body, or at least rent my body to my employer, you know, on a contractual basis. I suppose it's, but what I suppose to clarify my position. So that aspect's fine, but you can't. What I'm saying you can't sell is your self-ownership, which is what gives you your ownership. Like it's difficult to really sell your full body in a full sense, because like I suppose in my head I struggle to divorce the self from the body in that sense. Even though I understand you can't, like I say, you know, in the sense that I'm sell myself like an employment contract. Like in an employment contract, obviously I've got no problem with that. And I obviously wouldn't call that slavery. But I suppose the issue is like, say, for example, to use the example I gave of an actual real life scenario of somebody selling themselves into slavery by signing a contract where, you know, at least on the surface, they're basically giving themselves over to this person. I suppose what I'm saying is look, you can pledge your body to them in that sense. You can make that promise to say that, okay, I owe you this, or you know, I like servitude or whatever, like I do with my employer. But you can't like sell yourself, like your true self-ownership that gives you the control over your body and all your property that you have rightful ownership over from that kind of source self-ownership, if I'm making sense, is what I'm saying you can't sell. And because you can't sell that, you can't truly sell yourself as a slave.
Okay, I will maybe reformulate this idea. Let's not talk about if I sold my self-ownership, because I don't think that the ownership itself can be sold. Even if I would sell you my PC, I would sell you the PC, not the ownership to that PC. So I think that ownership itself can't be sold. Just the object of the ownership can be sold. So if I sell you my PC, I sold you the item. I didn't sell you the ownership. You are just owner. You are the new owner of the item. I am not anymore. But I didn't sold the ownership itself. I sold the item.
I'm not following the distinction there. Like if you sell the item, surely that is selling the ownership of it. Like, you know, you're acknowledging that you no longer own it.
Yes. Okay. Then okay. Then I understood it a bit different, but okay. I think that if I sell my body, I mean, like, it's obvious that if I sell you my body, you can't control the body. I'm still in control of this body. But if I sell you an animal, if I would sell you a cat, you are not controlling the cat. The cat is controlling itself. I am not controlling it. You are not controlling it. The cat is its own controller, but you can own it. If I would sell you my body, I would be still controller of the body, but you would be owner of that body. And I suppose that we both agree that I can sell you my organs. And as I can sell you my organs, I can sell you all my organs. And it's not necessary that you would take the organs and put them somewhere else. You can own something and not put it anywhere. Like if I sell you the processor of my PC, the processor can still be remaining in my PC and you can be its owner. And I will have my PC here. You can own the processor. We can just now do the contract. Like I will sell you the processor of my PC and you say, okay, I'm the owner. You will pay me for it or whatever, or I will give it to you. And then since then the processor is it's owned by you. The rest of the PC is owned by me. And the processor can remain there as long as you don't want it, as long as your will is to keep it there. I suppose that you can do the same thing with my organs. I can sell you my heart or my brain or whatever organs I need to my living, or all my organs. Since then, you are the owner of those organs, and those organs are there in my body as long as you agree with it. But since you wouldn't agree with that and you would want to put that organs out of my body, you are allowed to do that as well as you would be allowed to take the processor out of my PC, even if it would mean that the PC is not working anymore then. And I suppose you can do the same thing with the body. And if yes, I would call myself this is as slavery. However, I'm not telling you that you should do the same. It's just if I sell all my organs, all my body, everything what is there in the body, I don't need to distinguish between the body and the soul. I don't need to know where is the border between my self or soul or whatever and between the body, because I just sold the body and the rest is irrelevant for that contract, I think. So can we agree on this, that as well as I can sell you the processor of my PC and still use the PC as I want, as long as you are okay with that, I can sell you my heart or my brain and I can still use it as long as you are okay with that?
Before I answer that, can I put a question to you just to kind of clarify the understanding of it? Because the scenario I immediately thought of when you were, I mean, we did go through this before, and it's a good point as well, because it kind of gets into that intangibility of what is the self, because it reminded me of a video of someone saying, if you were able to move your body to like a different place, cell by cell, at what point would you have completely moved? You know what I mean? Like, because where are you, quote, you know, in your body kind of thing. And it's, so this kind of conversation almost kind of goes into that aspect. But in this scenario of, let's say, for example, I sold you my organs, and that I was going to have them removed because let's say you need them, like kidney or heart or whatever it was, you know, and I have the right to do that. My self-ownership. I can kill myself if I want to. So, you know, I'm allowed to do that. But let's say I do that. I sign the contract. I sell it. And so my heart now belongs to you, but it's still in my body. It's going to get taken out. But at the moment, it's still in my body. And then let's say like before the operation, I change my mind. I say, actually, I don't want to die. Sorry, I want my heart back. What would you kind of say to that sort of situation? Would you say, well, it's too late, it's not your heart anymore? Or would you say, oh, actually, maybe it is still your heart because it's still, you know what I mean, like, because it's still connected to your self-ownership in the sense of being connected to your body? And because the reason I asked the question is because whatever principles come into play seem very similar, although it's a little bit more of a stark reality, but it seems very similar to this voluntary slavery example. Is like, can the person back out? You know, can the voluntary slavery say, actually, I don't want to be a slave anymore? And if that's the case, then I feel like, well, you're not really selling your ownership because you're kind of retaining a level of ownership to allow you to say, you know, because if I sell you my car and then 2 years later I say, actually, I want my car back, you can tell me to go to hell because it's your car now. It's not my car. I have no claim to it. Whereas if I sell you my heart, at least while it's in my body, maybe after it's left my body, then I'm done. Although I'll be done. But let's say
let's say that you would sell also the body, because if you would just sell the heart, then okay, we can argue about if I can damage your body to get the heart out of it. But let's say that you wouldn't sell just the heart. You would sell the heart. You would sell the chest. You would sell the skin around. So there is nothing yours left in that place, and all that organs are mine, so I can operate with them as I want to. And I think that according to non-aggression principle is the same as with the car, and I don't see any difference in that, because as I can own the car, I can even much more own my body, because I think that my ownership of the car is in the end derived of my ownership of the body. So for me, it's very, very weird that I can sell the car and I wouldn't be able to sell my body. I think that as the body is mine, I can sell it, because if somebody is telling me you can't, then I don't feel it so much as mine. So I would like to know, so the answer to the question is yes, I think is the same as with the car. And if you don't agree, I would like to know, why do you see the difference between selling of the car and the heart?
I think that the main difference I think I see is, like, because the car is not, the car is property, so the car is separate from me. It's not like a part of me. It's not part of my self-ownership. So I don't have to sell any part of me. I don't have to sell my self-ownership or compromise my self-ownership, let's say, in any way to sell my car. I consider that property that, you know, is separate from me in that way. Now, I can do that with an organ. Let's say, for example, I can, like, an organ that I can live without, like I give you one of my kidneys or something like that. And once that's out of my body, I feel like I no longer have a claim to it. And I know saying words like "I feel like" isn't a very intellectually compelling way of putting it, but I suppose, I mean, and I know this isn't the way to do that. You shouldn't start with your instinct of what's right and wrong and then try to rationalize it afterwards. You should work from your principles and go out like that. But I have to say that when I think about that scenario, like I do with the voluntary slavery scenario of, you know, I don't want to be a slave anymore kind of thing, or I don't want to sell my heart anymore kind of thing, I feel like that person still has true ownership over themselves, and their heart is still connected to that self-ownership as part of them while it's in their body. And the problem is with enforcing it is because, like, if I say I'm selling you my car, and I sign a contract for that, I've given you the ownership. Even if I haven't given you possession of the car, the ownership, as far as I'm concerned, as we all recognize it, the rightful ownership has now passed to you. You are now the owner of that car, regardless of, because ownership and possession is obviously not the same thing. Someone could steal my car. It doesn't mean it's their car, but they will be in possession of it. So if I sell you my car, you now own it. And that hasn't affected my self-ownership anyway. If I sell you my kidney and give it to you, once it's out of my body, again, you now own it, and I'm quite happy that's now part of you and all the rest of it. Or, you can call it property even. But while it's in my body, I feel like I retain that right to say no, because it's still and maybe this is a flaw in how I'm conceptualizing things. Like, I'm obviously not including people under the banner of property that can be owned. So there is a kind of ownership over ourselves, even though I don't consider us property per se, that allows us to sell ourselves, for want of a better word. But it's not really selling ourselves. And when I said, oh, you're not really a slave in the if you sell yourself in that sense, that's not just me being pedantic over the words. That is also ties down to the meaning behind it as well. If I sell you my heart, until the heart is out of my body and in your body, it's still mine. And it's like with the slavery thing, I can never fully remove myself from my body, so I can never really sell myself.
I have the problem that you are all the time calling it your body, but if you accept that you can sell it, then it's not your body anymore. So you say the heart is in my body, but it's your body just until you sell it. And
this is the problem that comes from that. Where do we draw the line between ourselves and our body? At what point, but what I'm saying is if we say there is this self here and there's a self there, and what I'm saying is that true self, whether you want to call it a soul or whatever, or your mind or your consciousness, that person cannot be sold. That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying I don't agree with voluntary slavery, because that person, it's like I could make a contract. I could say to you, I promise to sell you, but I'm making an intangible promise. It's like I'm saying I promise to go back in time. I can't fulfill that because I can't physically do that. And I'm saying I can't physically give my self-ownership to you. I can sell you property, and I can even sell you pieces of me. And once I've separated those things from me, then I would no longer have a claim to them. But all the time they're attached to me, it seems like I would retain that. I suppose it's just because the way I'm looking at it is I'm looking at me offering the kind of voluntary slavery thing that we were talking about before. Just seems like, for me, very similar to an employment contract, where I'm just making a promise to basically act as your slave, and I could be in violation. I could be guilty of defrauding you and all the rest of it if I, don't fulfill that promise, if I owe you money or whatever the terms of the contract are. But the problem with enforcing that contract is, if I say, oh, I don't want to go along with that, for someone to say, well, you don't have a choice anymore because you're my property now. That's where I kind of say, I'm not saying this is what you're advocating, but this is where my resistance to the idea of voluntary slavery comes from, because I'm saying, well, no, that person's not your property. And even if he said he was and promised to be your property and all the rest of it, he made a promise he can't really fulfill, and the contract's invalid in that sense.
I don't understand one thing, and it's if you would say you can't sell anything of your body at all, I wouldn't agree, but I would understand this point. The thing which is confusing me is that you are saying that you can sell your kidney or part of your liver, or even probably your heart, I suppose. So you agree that you can sell anything of your body, even if it will kill you. But you say that the moment when the ownership is changed is the moment when the part of your body is leaving your body. And I don't understand why. I don't understand why. If you would say you just can't sell anything of your body, you can't sell your kidney, you can't sell your heart, you just can't sell your liver because it's yourself, and as long as you sell it, it's still yours because it was your kidney. So even if it's in somebody else, it's still yours. I wouldn't agree, but I would understand this point. I don't understand the point when you say you can sell anything of your body, you can even sell your heart and die, but you can do it only in the moment when the heart or the kidney or whatever is leaving your body. And I don't understand why I can sell anything on the world with this mine. I can sell it and it can stand on that place as it is, and it can just change the owner and everything can stand still. So I can change, I can sell you my PC, the PC can be still here and just you will be the owner and nothing can happen. Why? There is exception on the parts of the body, because when we are talking about the parts of the body, you say you can sell it, but the only moment when the transfer can be made is when the part of your body is leaving the body. And why it's not like with anything else, why I can't sell anything from my body and it change the owner and it will stand still on the place where it was. How is this possible? Because this is something what I don't even understand.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I suppose what it comes from is partly I don't view like the difference with your car or your PC and say your body is like, or yourself rather, is your car, your PC, they are property. So selling them is nice and easy. But because I don't think you can sell yourself, I think the only way you can sell parts of yourself, like parts of your body, is by separating them from what I'm calling yourself, so that they now become like, you know how we create property by separating elements of nature from nature. We'll cut down a tree and we'll make it into a table, and now the table is our property, but the tree perhaps wasn't. It's just a part of nature that we've utilized those resources and turned it into property that we own. It's kind of a similar thing.
You can't own a tree?
Sorry, go on.
You think we are not owning the tree?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you might have a tree that like that you planted yourself. But what I'm saying is, let's say you went out into the forest where it's just trees for everybody, and you just picked one to separate from nature. So before that moment, it was part of nature. It wasn't part of your property. You don't own the forest.
Which is not owned by anybody.
Yeah, it's just just a natural area. Yeah, so you've just taken some natural resources, you separated it from nature, and you've turned it into property that you now own, and then you can sell on for similarly. Something similar would be like if I was to cut off all my hair to make it into a wig. The hair is no longer part of me. I've turned it into property. Just like I've separated the wood from nature by cutting down the tree and make it into a chair. I've separated my hair from myself and made it a wig and turned that into property which I can sell. And I feel like I can do similar things with my organ. But what I'm saying is until I cut my hair, I reserve the right to change my mind about cutting my hair, because.
So if I understand it correct, the reason to not be able to do it is that you can't sell yourself. Like,
yeah,
I was seeing it from the other point of view. Like, if you can do this, then you can sell yourself. But you are saying you can't sell yourself like this because it would mean that you can sell yourself. So the reason is that if it would be possible, then the slavery would be possible as well, the voluntary slavery.
Well, yeah. I mean, basically, what I'm saying, because I understand how you're getting from where you are, because you're obviously coming from the other direction, saying, "Well, I own myself; I can sell myself." It's as simple as that. But I suppose, from my point of view, I'm saying, well, your true self ownership, you can't sell. It's not possible. You can make whatever promises you want, but they would be as meaningless as promising to go back in time or fly or something else that is not physically possible. So what I'm saying is,
possible, I think.
Sorry, go on.
Like. I see there some slight difference between this is physically possible. Like you can't physically go back in time, but it is physically possible to like you can make laws. And now regardless if it's centralized laws or decentralized, you just can't make laws which are saying you can go back in time. This is not possible, because even if the law would say it, you can't enforce it. But you can easily make laws that can be enforced, and by these laws you can sell yourself because this can be enforced. So I think there is a difference between you can't have law which is letting you go back in time, because even if the law would exist, you can't enforce it. But you can have law which would ensure that you can sell yourself, because this law can be enforced. I just see here something.
I understand what you're saying, but yeah, I mean, I suppose one's dealing with concepts rather than, you know, a physical reality of going back in time, whereas the other is what we're calling something or whatever. But I suppose from my conceptualization of ownership, rights, what self-ownership is, and that distinction between people and property, based on that, I'm saying you can't. It's as impossible, because it wouldn't, you know, like I can't in the true, I mean, it's difficult because and like I say, this is where we get into that blurry line between the self and what the self truly is. But it's like, basically, where, like, I suppose, because when I try to put it to this real life situation of, like, say, the two parties that are contesting this voluntary slavery situation, and the voluntary slave who's saying, like, I don't want to be a slave anymore, I still own myself, and I know I made a contract, but I want to change my mind, and, you know, I may owe them all this money, but that doesn't mean they should be able to enslave me for the rest of my life, and, you know, and all the rest of it. It's like, the reason why I would be on their side over that is because if the other party said, well, look, he sold himself to us, he doesn't own himself anymore, I would be like, yeah, but he can't sell himself. He made a promise, and, you know, he can make the like, you know, he can sell his labor, and you know, he can in that sense, but he can't actually give himself to you. So it's an invalid contract in the same sense. Like I say, I know it's not the same as, like, you can't go back in time because you physically can't, whereas with concepts we can do whatever we decide those concepts mean. But from where I'm coming from with regards to my understanding of those concepts, like, self-ownership at its core is something that cannot be sold. It's something that's always there. So any contract I make to sell that to you is no more valid than if I made the contract. Well, I suppose it's not exactly the same as trying to sell somebody else, because I don't have any right over somebody else, yes, whereas I do at least have right over myself. But I'm no more able to sell like, I can't give myself ownership to you. Yeah, you see where I'm coming from. But okay, I do understand where you, sorry, I do understand where you're coming from your point of view, because you still got this, well, if I can sell myself, and, you know, if I can sell my organs and all the rest of it. But from my point of view, it's really about what is the self. And I suppose because I'm conceptualizing the self as including your body while it's attached to, quote unquote, you. I mean, this is where it's hard, because it's separating you from your body. But, like, all that time, it's still yours. And only when like I say, if I cut my hair off, if I take my organ out, then it's no longer attached to me. I've separated from me, like I separate the tree from nature, and it's property, and I no longer have any thingy to it. Whereas my computer is always separate from me. It might be my property, but I can give that ownership to you, and now it's your property, regardless of who's in possession of it. But it was never intrinsically connected to my self-ownership in the way that my heart is, or even my hair. Even something as frivolous as my hair, while it's on my body, is still my hair. And I can say, right, I'm selling my hair to you now, but until I actually cut it off and give it to you, I know it sounds, I understand why that sounds counterintuitive, because it doesn't work. You think, well, that should work. Why doesn't it work the same as the car, yes, as it does with the hair? But that is because I'm making that distinction between people and property, and the self-ownership that's kind of connected to our bodies, that's not connected to our car.
Okay, thank you very much for this, because I think that now I understand you better than the last time, because I think the last time I understood it slightly different, and thank you for this. So I think that I understand your point. I suppose you understand mine too. So we can here agree on the disagreement. And we can go to the next step, which was, as you were asking about, we both would own some security agency or something like that, and our clients would have some conflict between about this. I think the first thing I would say is that I think that it's good to separate the enforcing of law and the creation of law. I think that there are two different institutions or two different jobs. I don't say that there can't be any company which would do both things, but I think it's two different things, two different businesses. One business is to enforce the law, and one business is to find the law, let's say, or establish the law. I mean the concept of it. So the one thing is some security agency which would enforce the law, and the other thing is some arbiter who would do the decision on who is right, who is wrong, and claim the ownership claims and so on. Like he would. I'm sorry. Just I think there are two professions. One profession is to enforce the law, like police, and the other is to judge, like the judges do. And I think that if we would be the owners of the security companies and our clients would have problems, I think that we would have some contract between you and me, and the contract would say, let's say, if some of the judges on our list, we would have some list of judges which are trustworthy for us. So we would have some lists, and if the list would have some intersection, we would choose some judge from that intersection. If not, we would choose some judges from our list, and there would be two judges, and they would together agree on some other one. So there would be three, which and they can agree on the result. So I suppose that if we would be the law enforcers, it wouldn't be on us to judge if you can or can't sell yourself to the slavery or not. If we would be enforcers of law, we would just enforce the decision of the judges which we trust. So I think if we would be owners of these companies, it wouldn't be on us to be in conflict about if you can or can't sell yourself to the slavery. I think this is very important, exactly because what you said. If we wouldn't have the same point of view to the non-aggression principle, which just happened now, we would have to have some conflict, and it wouldn't be good for our businesses. It wouldn't be good for the society. It wouldn't be good for us. This is, by the way, one great thing on the anarcho-capitalism and on the capitalism itself. Very often, the thing which is not good for the business is also not good for the society. So for the society, it would be very bad if we would solve our conflict by shooting at each other. But for us as well, because it would cost much more money and much more resources than if we would let some judge or arbiter to judge us. So I think that in the praxis, you wouldn't need all people to agree on the exact form of non-aggression principle, because even if you would be the law enforcers and you would have your company, I would have my company, and our clients would be in some conflict, I don't think that it's necessary for us to see the non-aggression principle from the same point of view, because we can delegate this problem to other people. This is something which is very important in thinking of polycentrical law, because if you have central law, it's quite obvious. We all know it from our world. So judges are judging it, and they are saying who is right, who is wrong. If the law is not central one, but it's decentralized law, the delegation is very important on that concept, because if you have, let's say, two neighbors and they have some conflict, some fight, this is very personal. It's usually not some business case. It's very personal case. and there is a lot of emotions. Since they both are delegating the case on the companies, like our hypothetical companies, law enforcing companies, it's starting to be business case and not personal case, which is making it much more easy to determine, because we want to earn money and not shoot ourselves. We want to earn and not. And but still we can be still in some conflict, because we want to protect our clients, because we want to keep that clients. So again, another delegation would make it even better, because then we can delegate it to some judges. I mean, like freelance judges, which would be there for making these decisions. And those judges are practically, I think, in anarcho-capitalism, creating the law. Like not just the judges, but it's similar like to all other businesses, that the capitalists who are doing that are creating the they are saying how it would look like, but the clients are choosing which form of it they want. So as well as the manufacturer of cell phones are saying how the mobile phones are looking. In the end, the client is saying how the mobile phone is looking like, because if some manufacturer would create some cell phones which nobody would want to use, he is not selling it, and some other manufacturer is selling something what the people really want. So I suppose that the same is with law. Like the judges or arbiters on the free market are creating the law. In the end, the people are creating the law by choosing which judges services they use. Either they choose it directly, like the people, for example, when we would be some business partners, we can do some contract, and in this contract we can choose some judge who would solve problems which we would have around the contract. But also indirectly, like if we would be the neighbors and we would have some conflict, we ask our law enforcing companies, and those companies are choosing the judges, the arbiters. So I think that I don't think that we need to agree on if voluntary slavery is okay or not okay, if it's according to the NAP or not according to the NAP, because even if we don't agree like now, even if we would be in the anarcho-capitalist society, the owners of two big law enforcing companies, we still don't need to agree on what exactly the non-aggression principle is, and we still don't need to be in conflict if we are reasonable people and we mainly want to earn money and live in peace than lose our monies and jobs and lives.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that I mean, these scenarios are so kind of fringe and extreme that we're creating. We're almost trying to find problems in our own ideology. But that's why I think it's important that we do this, because we're trying to find pick holes in our own, in our own ideology, because, obviously we think it's the way to go, but, we want to be able to understand it all its ins and outs. And I think these are the kind of conversations that help us really understand the overall concepts in a greater detail. The one thing I would push back on what you did say about these judges creating the law. I mean, I would agree that they're interpreting the law, but I don't think they can ever be allowed to create it. I mean, one of the things that obviously my Nations of Sanity project is built on is the idea that the one thing that we all do as part of our defining how we define our society as a free society is establish the non-aggression principle as the law. So while there may be a certain room for interpretation with regards, and you can say, well, this judge is going to interpret this and this judge is going to interpret that. They've also, just like, for example, judges in America have to work from the Constitution. I suppose what I'm saying is all of these private courts and judges and arbiters and whatever that are operating within under the free society that I'm advocating for, they would all have to do it in according to the non-aggression principle and according to this peace agreement, which is basically saying, look, the non-aggression principle is the law. Now, I don't know if I've ever gone into detail about the peace agreement that I present, but we kind of present it as like a 3-part peace agreement. And just to break that down, part 1 is just the basic agreement saying the non-aggression principle should be the law. Part 2 is what I call the lines in the sand, which is about separating what we call the black and white, where we have this reasonable certainty over the non-aggression principle, from the grey areas. And then part 3 is about establishing rightful ownership, which is just basically ratifying property ownership based on the non-aggression principle. Now, part 2 is the most kind of relevant part of this 3-part agreement, because when I first kind of came up with this idea, it was just the one part. It was just, let's make the non-aggression principle the law. That's how it should be, But then this whole conversation about different interpretations starts coming up. I realized it's not enough for us to agree that the non-aggression principle is the law. We need to agree on some kind of, even if we can't presuppose every scenario, so we can't put in writing exactly what we do in every kind of scenario, because we can't envisage every single scenario. But what we can do is establish a proper approach. So what I'm saying is part 2 is dictating that we have this thing where we separate what we call the black and white from the grey. And I understand that not everyone's going to call the same things black and white as they are the grey, but we still take this approach where we have the separation between what we call the black and white and the grey. We draw this line in the sand, which we call a limit of tolerance over differing interpretations. So we understand that there's this grey area where people can agree to disagree, but we also say that there's a limit to that, where people could just take the piss and say black is white, and we're not going to let them do that. We're going to say, no, at this point, definitely violating the non-aggression principle. And with that kind of basis of reasonable certainty, which is kind of similar to what we have in criminal law today, like that beyond reasonable doubt that you have to establish to convict people criminally, would kind of carry through in a way to this idea of this whole part 2 of this peace agreement, where we're saying, okay, only when we have that reasonable certainty can we enforce. Because if we quote unquote enforce the non-aggression principle when we lack reasonable certainty, then we're guilty of criminal recklessness ourselves, because we may be applying force that's not justified. And if we're not certain, or if we don't at least have reasonable certainty, we can't. The whole thing about beyond a reasonable doubt and reasonable certainty is an acknowledgement that we can never be absolutely certain. We have to work within what we call reasonable, and that's what I kind of view this kind of peace agreement working on. Like we can't presuppose every situation, and we can't deny that there's fuzzy edges and grey areas, but what we can do is adopt an approach where, based on the fact that everyone has equal right over only themselves, so no one has a divine right to say their interpretation of the non-aggression principle is beyond another's, we all have to just work within that realms of reasonable certainty. And if we're in a situation where I'm beyond a reasonable doubt that this person didn't violate the non-aggression principle, so you can't use force against him, but you're beyond a reasonable doubt that they did violate the non-aggression principle and you can use force against them, then we could be in a situation where, if we're both so adamant that it's black and white from our perspectives, then conflict would seem almost unavoidable, outside of us taking the time to negotiate for our own self-interests, to not have that conflict. Sorry, I've gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole. I've lost my point. Go on.
There's again more things I want to react on, but the first I want to ask you, for example, our disagreement on if you can or can't sell yourself to voluntary slavery. Is this something what is in your gray area, or is something which should be in the black or white area?
I think, do you know what? I have to be honest. I think it is a black and white, at least in where the line is, where I draw it, where I would defend, in my law enforcement would say, no, it's black and white. We're going to defend this person who's not a slave, even though he's made this contract. I would consider that I would consider that black and white. Yeah.
The problem is that from our previous conversations, you were telling that the point of the lines in the sand and the gray, black, and white area is that you should determine something what all reasonable people would agree beyond all reasonable doubt. This is how you define it. And this is one of my problems with this concept, because I consider both of us as reasonable people, and as we were talking about it, I think that both of our doubts are reasonable. So my practical problem with your concept is that even both of us, we are anarcho-capitalist liberty. I'm not even counting the rest of the society. I'm counting like two of us which are anarcho-capitalist or voluntary. You are calling yourself voluntarist. I'm calling myself both. But still, we have here something. For example, for me, I would also put the voluntary slavery to the black and white, but I would put it to the white, and you would put it to the black. And the point is that I think there is no way how to draw the line in the sand, because you see that if you agree that we both are reasonable person, and if you agree that we both have reasonable doubts, and I think we have because we weren't able to convince the other, so I think our doubts are very reasonable, because, you know, if it wouldn't be like that, one of us would convince the other. But then I see a problem in drawing lines in the sand if you have here a lot of people who wouldn't agree with us almost at all, because you have here also a lot of Democrats and communists and socialists and so on, and you want to do some rules which are applied on all the society, and even both of us, which are extremely similar in that opinions, wouldn't agree what is black and what is white and what is gray, then I don't understand how you want to put this in some practice, because I don't see how to solve it. You are saying that this should avoid the conflicts, but I don't think this would avoid the conflict. I think just the creation of the line in the sand would create conflict, because let's say that we would now we both should live in some society, and we should draw that lines, and if you would say, okay, let's put this to the gray area because not even all anarcho-capitalist libertarians and voluntarists are agreeing, so let's put it to the gray area. But you see it in the black area, I see it in the white area, and I think that you are saying if we all agree, it would prevent a conflict. But I think I can say it like, if we would all agree, there is no conflict anyway. But if we don't agree on where the lines in the sand are, then I don't see the point in them, because it's just creating that conflict even before it even happened. So I think it even creates more conflict than if we let it flow, because the conflicts are here even before it even happened. Like it's possible that the problem wouldn't even come into the reality, but we are creating it here even on the theoretical level. And if you see that we can't agree on it, how you can draw the lines in the sand and say, let's prevent conflicts by that? Because if you draw the line, I see there coercion, and I see there that you are taking me my freedom to serve myself. And if I draw the line, you see there that I am taking somebody's freedom to own all his organs. So how to do that?
Well, I mean, the thing is that I get what you're saying, but for me, it actually, although it does show how it's difficult and where the problems come up, for me, it also shows how essential it is. Because if we don't have, like, for example, if we don't have like if we have just the part one basic agreement of let's make the NAP the law, then these sort of problems of interpretations come up a lot, not just with voluntary slavery, but with everything. You know, like you might have socialists or communists trying to attack property rights because of some convoluted reason that they have and whatever. So that's why I went to this part two of saying, okay, it's not enough to just agree in principle to the non-aggression principle. We need to define that principle and kind of establish lines in the sand where we can ahead of time, and then obviously an approach for, because we can't presuppose every scenario, an approach for how we deal with with that interpretation. Now, for me, this is why this is needed, because in the absence of any kind of peace agreement, we're still going to have this conflict because we have this difference of interpretation and we're both enforcing the non-aggression principle. One of us is defending the liberty of the voluntary slave and the other one's defending the liberty of the person who he's defrauded by not fulfilling his contract. Like in any kind of scenario I can think of, there's that conflict between us two. Now, if I imagine two potential realities, both we've had a revolution of a free society. One is the Nations of Sanity style one, where we've established this peace agreement, and we've got that as our kind of constitution, if you like. And then the other one is, say, perhaps more general anarcho-capitalism, absent of that peace agreement, which is more in line with what you advocate. Or let's say in both scenarios is the Nations of Sanity one, but one is your interpretation of voluntary slavery and one is mine. So everything else is, and what we'd probably find is almost every situation, because most of the stuff that we talk about does marry up. It's only these very fringe issues that delve into real, almost philosophical areas of what is the self and what is property and all of that, where we're coming to these disagreements. But these things obviously still exist. And I suppose I'm saying that if we come into these areas, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I've had a mind wipe.
Okay.
So,
I know that.
If you could remind me what we were talking about, it would jig my brain back into gear.
We were talking about that line of sense, and we were talking about that. I see the problem that we don't even agree on it, and if we two.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah. So I've got the two possible realities. Is one where, so basically, say we have this conflict, and in reality A, the non-aggression the peace agreement is established, and the understanding of self-ownership is in line with what I'm talking about, where you can't really sell yourself and voluntary slavery is not allowed. So in our conflict, we'll both go to the judge and we'll present our case like we're doing right now, but the judge will side with me because of the interpretation of self-ownership and what have you is like that. And obviously you wouldn't be happy because you wouldn't be just like, oh well, that's a grey area, so it doesn't matter. You'd be like, no, this is a black and white. They've got a black and white thing here wrong. Everything else is groovy, but they've got this one black and white thing wrong. And then in the other reality, our reality B, I lose the case, and because they've interpreted it the other way where people can. Now, when I look at those two realities, obviously I'm advocating for the one that I think is correct, and that's the one that I'm, aiming for and all the rest of it. If you said to me today, okay, we're going to have a revolution, but it's going to be reality B. So we're going to have the non-aggression principle as the peace agreement and interpreted as most of us understand it. But this one difference, people will be considered property in the sense that they can sell themselves, and voluntary slavery will be enforced and what have you. I will consider that to be wrong. I will think that's a black and white wrong. But if you offered that to me in replacement of the world we have now, where the non-aggression principle basically is completely understood and enforced with this one exception where it is, in my opinion, actually violated because it is a black and white issue, I'd be tempted to take that, because that is still mostly a free society, but it would have that one thing wrong. And like I say, it's not a grey area for me. It is black and white wrong. But it's the reason it's black and white, it ties back to this. And this is something, like I say, I don't think everything could be presupposed in this peace agreement ahead of time. But this is something that could be nipped in the bud ahead of time, because conversations like this do make us examine what we're talking about when we talk about self-ownership, what is property and what we can sell. And then when we have the scenario of the voluntary slavery, or I even think it's even easier example to understand is, and perhaps, although I would imagine your answer would be the same as it would be with a voluntary slave, but to go back to the heart transplant example, I've sold my heart to you, which under my system I haven't really, and it's not valid until it's out of my body, but for you it is. I'm on the hospital bed, or it's the day before or whatever, and I change my mind. What are you going to kill me? You know, are you against my will when I'm begging for my life and take my heart because it's no longer mine and I made that promise and that contract? You know, like from my point of view, it's like, you know, it's a double pronged thing. It's, you know, I know this is an intellectual discussion, not a feelings thing, but our moral compass does have an instinctual aspect to it, even though we have to intellectualize it and work it on the principles and the logic. And in both areas, I feel like it would be wrong for you to take that person's heart if they changed their mind about giving it to you while it was still in their body. Once it's gone too late, kind of.
Well, I think I have there again two things to react. The first, I will do the last because it's quite easier. I just want to say that this feeling thing and the feeling moral compass is leading us to much more than just this. For example, if you see a person who is like hungry or thirsty and is dying or on starvation, I think that in this case, the moral compass would say the same, and it's still not anything against the ownership and the ownership law. So if you see a person who is dying of starvation, and you see another person who has plenty of food and whatever, and the rich one isn't giving anything to the poor one, your moral compass, I suppose, is saying that that this is not right. My moral compass is saying it too. If you see the situation like one person is really dying and the other has a lot of food and drinks and he's just not giving him anything, it feels wrong. But just because this feels wrong doesn't mean that we should universalize the principle that the rich one would give him the foods and so on. And if you see the case like somebody is begging for his life because he should lose his heart, it also feels wrong. But it doesn't mean that it advocates the universal principle to do it different, because we can say the example with the heart, which is very emotional, but we both know, and you said it also, that it's the same with the hair. So if I would send my dreadlocks to somebody and then I would be begging on the bed to not cut my hair, it's much less emotional, but it's the exactly same principle. So I would be very much careful with that feeling moral compass thing, because you can feel a lot of cases that they are wrong, and they might be. I'm not saying that they are not wrong. If you see a person bleeding on a street and other people are crossing him over, it's just bad. But it doesn't mean that it's not their right to do that. And a lot of things we feel bad. I feel the same bad about abortions and so on. I feel it bad, but I don't think it's. But you have the different opinion on this. I remember from the last time. But there is a lot of such cases that you can feel wrong, but it's not the reason for making the rules based on your feeling, because the rules can make much more bad than good. But the main thing I wanted to say to that your speech, during that your speech, I maybe realized that we don't even agree on the first point of your constitution or agreement, which is saying that the non-aggression principle should be the universal law. And now, this is very important to understand, that I am absolutely fully agreeing with the non-aggression principle. And I think that the non-aggression principle should be, I want to live in a world which should be established by non-aggression principle. I absolutely do. On the other hand, I don't think it should be universal law, because you were also talking about revolution. I don't think that there is possible to do such thing like a revolution to the liberty and actually make it good and with the result which we are aiming for. I am quite sure that even if, for example, we would have now the power over the police or the army, and we would really be in charge, and we would have the ability to control the force in the society, I don't think that we should do the revolution to liberty or freedom by this means, because I don't think it's possible to do that. If we would agree that, let's say, we would win elections or whatever, and now we would be like really in charge and in power, and we would be able to give the orders to the police, to the army, and to everything, and we would say, okay, so let's cancel the state, let's abolish the state, and let's do the anarcho-capitalism. But I don't think it's even doable like that, because if you do it through the force, if you do it through the police or through the army, I think that you are another revolutionary, like, I don't know, Lenin or whoever, and now you want to protect your own revolution because the people in the society want state. And if you have the society where you are in charge, you have the power, but 99% of people want state, and you are the one who want liberty, it can be legitimate. You can be right to do that, but it's not working. I don't think that it's the way how to make it real, because if you force the people to not have the state, you are practically becoming the state because you are forcing them. And if you let them to do whatever they want and you give them freedom, they just establish the state. So I don't think that you can reach the freedom by force. I believe that you can reach democracy by force, you can reach communism by force, you can reach a lot of things by force, but I don't believe that you actually can use force to create freedom from not free society. I think this is not possible. I think the way is different. I think that the way
are you saying it's a contradiction?
I think so. I think that in practical life, in reality, yes. I think that theoretically it would be possible, but I don't think it's practically possible, because if you are living in a society where 99% of people are not free, they don't want to be free, they don't understand the concept of freedom, and they don't evaluate it. It hasn't the value for them, because the higher value for them is to, I don't know, protect somebody from getting drunk, or protect somebody from getting addicted, or pay somebody's education or medical care or whatever. And they are putting all these values above the freedom. You can't use force to make them to be free, because I don't think it's possible. I think that they need to understand the freedom to live it, and they are not able to live it just because you tell them to do, because then it would be you are practically enslaving them in something that they don't want to. I don't think that you can make the people to live free if they don't even understand what is that, and if their values are that primarily you must live in safe environment, nobody have to be poor, everybody should be equal, and if they have these values, you just can't force them to live freely, because I don't think they are able to. The only thing you can do is to use force to prevent them from taking them your freedom, but you can't give them freedom, because the freedom, the liberty can't be given, the liberty must be taken, and you can't give somebody liberty or freedom if he doesn't understand it and doesn't want it. And I don't think that there is such thing like revolution to liberty or freedom. I think that the only way how to do it is evolutionary way. And I think that the only thing is to explain to people, show them the freedom, and they must want it, and then it will happen. And the way how I think it practically can only happen is that you are not just coming and saying, we are abolishing the state. This won't work. Like, it's at first it's not possible, but even if you would have the power to do that, it's not possible to do this. I think that what you can do and what you can achieve in the very long time is to show people that freedom is good, that they can, that even the safety can be best ensured by freedom and not by force and giving up freedom. And when you show people these principles and they would understand these principles, you can demonopolize the state. Demonopolize the state power, demonopolize the state power at first at education system or medical system and so on. And in the last step also in a law system. And I suppose the demonopolization should take step by step, and that you can't just come with the new, this is the new constitution, this is the non-aggression principle, and now we will live it, because nobody can, nobody understands, nobody wants, and this just won't work. I think what would work is that the state would say, okay, this is our law system, let's allow to do parallel law systems. And what I believe is that the non-aggression principle would win the free market competition in approaches to law. But I don't think that we should enforce the non-aggression principle against the free market, because I believe that also the law should be done according to the free market. And I believe that in the long term, the free market law would turn into non-aggression principle. And this is why I don't think that we should try to establish some non-aggression principle law, universal law for everybody, because I think that we should let the people to do the law as they want, decentralized by the free market. And I believe that the free market law would converge to the non-aggression principle. But I think that it's very important to do it like this, like to let the people and let the free market to establish the law as according to the people's wishes. And I believe that this law would be the non-aggression principle. But if we would do it from the other side, like first enforce the non-aggression principle, I think this wouldn't work well. And the last thing I want to say, I would use some example. Let's say that, for example, now by the free market, we know that we would have here, I don't know, whatever, we would have here operation system Windows and some Unix versions, and the PCs are looking like they are looking. And this is good result of the free market forces. I think that this is good because it's the result of the free market forces. But if we would say, let's design it from the top, let's design it, let's design how the operation systems would look like, let's design how the PCs would look like, and so on, I think this wouldn't work. And I think the result, even if it would be from the first point of view the same result as it's now, I think it wouldn't be working because of the way how we established it, because the free market also allows people to change it as they want. But if it would be designed from the top, it doesn't have this ability. And I think the law has the same attributes, like if you let the people to build the law from the bottom, it would in the end come to the non-aggression principle, and we don't need to so much solve the lines in the sand and so on, because it would be created spontaneously. But I think it's a very big mistake to try to design the law from the top, even if the law which we are designing is the law which you want to design from the top is something what I really like and what's like very good in my taste. But I don't think that this way is the good way. I think the good way is to let it grow from the bottom to the top.
Yeah, I mean, fun enough, I think that's a fundamental difference between that I've had with a lot of anarcho-capitalists I speak to, because they always come from it from a evolution versus revolution point of view, and so I'm hearing a lot of echo on myself here, and I'm coming from a bit of a revolution. I'm not against evolution there, you know. I like to play my part in stepping us in towards, you know, moving our evolution in that direction, but I guess I don't trust our evolution to just do that, even with our best efforts and all the rest of it. So I am kind of, I'm contributing to the evolution, but I'm also fighting for the revolution, if you know, if that makes sense. But to your point about the forcing freedom thing, because I did a video a little while ago addressing this, because somebody else made a similar point about, you know, if you force freedom, then you become the state that you know, oppose. But I don't think if you're truly forcing freedom, if you're truly enforcing the non-aggression principle, I don't think there's a contradiction there, because a rapist cannot complain that I'm violating their rights. And I'm using a very obvious example with a rapist, but a rapist can't say that I'm violating their rights by establishing a law against rape, because they don't have the right to rape. So there's no violation of their freedom that they can make a case for without first acknowledging the concept of freedom and self-ownership in the first place. For them to make any case that there's a unjustified violation of their rights, they need to acknowledge the concept of rights. And once they do that, they can't coherently claim a right to rape somebody. And what my point is although, you know, as we've spoken about in the part 2 aspect, there's obviously the difference of interpretations when you get into specific details, but the overall, coming back to the basic, you know, the basic agreement, the basic principle, enforcing the non-aggression principle is objectively justifiable, because, like, as soon as you know, because the thing is, people can take two views when it comes to morality. They can reject morality completely and just say, look, might makes right. There is no such thing as morals. It's just concepts and make-believe and all the rest of it. And I couldn't really argue with that. But as soon as somebody invokes morality or rights or freedom, right and wrong, justification, any of these things, as soon as they step into the realm of moral landscape, then they're in a situation where it's like, okay, well, are you going to reject the concept of self-ownership, or are you going to accept it? If you reject it, then you reject any claim to morality, any claim to rights of your own. And if you accept it, then you accept the non-aggression principle. There's a self-defeating argument to anybody that would want to complain that their rights are being violated through the enforcement of the non-aggression principle, because they don't have the right to violate the non-aggression principle. So they couldn't, you know, and it's like the idea of creating a state by banning us, like, you know, say abolishing the state would create a state. I mean, it depends how we're defining state, but let's say we're defining state as a ruling authority, something that violates the non-aggression principle, rather than, say, a voluntary collective that wouldn't violate the non-aggression principle. If we're defining a state as a ruling government, then establishing the non-aggression principle and enforcing it as the law, as the terms of peace, not only would that abolish ruling governments, but any claim that it is a ruling government, like if I tell you that, you know, if I basically say, look, we've got this peace agreement where we're going to use force against anybody that aggresses against anybody else, we're going to use it's a declaration of defensive force. It's not a violation of anybody's rights or freedom, because people don't have those rights or freedom. And also, it's like with the idea of, and my problem with allowing the market to make laws is, and this ties back, I think I mentioned this in our previous conversation, that the debate I had with David Friedman about what even is the free market and what is anarcho-capitalism. It's like, well, if you're not defining the free market as by the non-aggression principle, then I don't know what the free market is, because if it's not within line with the like, for example, the market we have today, we have a market now, but it's not what I would call a free market, because we have drug laws, we have regulation, we have taxes, we have all these things that violate the non-aggression principle. And those are the things that disqualify it from being a free market. So for me, the idea of the free market making laws is kind of a non-starter, because for me, the free market itself needs to be defined as by the non-aggression principle as its kind of defining law.
I agree with you, but I think it's not what I was talking about. I agree with you, and this is what I meant when I said theoretically yes, but I don't believe that it's possible in reality. All of this, what you said, from the concept of ethics or moral, I agree with it on this hypothetical level of thoughts. I'm just quite sure that this is not we are not able to put it into reality. You were talking about the rapists. I would show you on the example. If you have a society where quite all of the people are just not raping, and they are seeing rape as something bad, and there are few people who are raping, you can do what you just said. You can take away the right of the rapist because they, let's say, gave up on them when they raped. So you can, for example, lock them somewhere, or you can, I don't know, whatever to do with them to separate them from the society, to prevent them to not rape anybody again. Well, the locking is probably not so good example, because I'm not so big fan of the prisons, but whatever. Let's say you just can separate the rapists from the society, and you are absolutely ethically allowed to do it because they are raping people, so you can take away their freedom to prevent them to rape people anymore. I absolutely agree. But this is practically able in our society when you have 99% of people who are just not raping and denying rapists, and 1% of rapists. Let's say, I don't know the exact percentage, but you can do it like that. If we now would live in a society where 99% would be raping, and they would be agreeing on that raping is okay, that if you have the force to do it, you can rape, and we would have here a conversation about that we don't like raping, I would tell you the same what I told you about the state. You can't make the people to not rape because you are not able to, because even if you would have the police and you will have the army and whatever, if those people think that it's okay to rape, they would do it anyway. Even that police we would have would be also raping, and you are just not able to make the people to stop rape just because you say it's not correct and you have the force. That's the only way you can achieve that you won't be raped, because you have the force. So you probably won't be, but maybe you would be. And it's also possible that by enforcing the not raping laws, you would establish the police who would go and rape people the most. It's also possible, because your intention could be, I will stop the raping in the society. You would have a police. The police would be absolutely under your control. But you are still in the society where 99% thinks that raping is okay. I think it's very likely that if you would try to enforce the not raping by some of your laws or interventions with this police, you would probably cause more raping, because I can imagine that those policemen would be raping by doing their job, and the people would be agreeing with it because they think that it's okay to rape. They just wouldn't be raped themselves, but they in general find it like okay. And this is analogical problem to our state system, where the people don't want to be abused by the state themselves, but they in general agree with the state coercion and that the state is abusing people. They are just somehow not. They are somehow believe in the same time that the state can be abusing people, but they think that it would somehow protect them from being abused, which is contradiction. And I think that if we would be in such society where 99% is raping and they are saying that raping is good, I think that the best thing we can do is not to make anti-rape revolution. The best thing we can do is to talk people and explain them why it's not good to rape and why they shouldn't do that. And a lot of people say this is not enough. Just talking is not enough. It's not changing anything. But I didn't find any better way how to achieve that goal, because I am really convinced, I really believe that if we would be in society where 99% people are rapists, we are just not able to stop raping by any other way than change the paradigm in the society, the global opinion that the raping is okay. And I think that with the freedom and with the state, it's the same. I'm not telling you that if you would enforce the non-aggression principle that you would be acting against the moral or ethics. This is not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that if you do that, if you try it in current society, you would probably do more bad than good in the result, because I don't believe that it's practically possible to come to this society with these people which we have here and make a revolution to liberty, because in the same way as the rapist would be raping still, I suppose that the statist would be stating still.
I understand what you're saying, and yeah, I mean, obviously, I do agree that from a practical point of view, if most people don't agree with the laws, they're not enforceable, regardless of what the law is. But and I understand your point better now. I mean, I suppose the point I was making, which I realise isn't what you were saying now, but yeah, the point I was making is I wouldn't be guilty of violating the non-aggression principle by enforcing it, just like a law against rape isn't violating anyone's freedom, but it would be unenforceable if 99% of the people think that rape's okay and wanted to practice it, and your police force would probably do it and all the rest of it. So yeah, I take that point, but it doesn't really change my approach, because like I say, I don't oppose the evolutionary efforts. I just don't trust them on their own. And to use a real life example, I mean, although rape was very prevalent and allowed in our history, various cultures and places of the world, but it was never really kind of like an enforced, accepted thing. But let's use a real life example of our history and talk about slavery, where there was an evolution against slavery, but there was also a revolution. I think we almost need to fight for both a little bit. Yeah, I understand that fighting for the revolution when you're not working on the evolution of people's minds isn't going to happen. And to be honest, if 99% of people were against the law, you probably wouldn't be able to have your revolution. You'd need a decent percentage of people to even be able to make that establishment. The same problems that would make it nearly impossible to enforce would make it nearly impossible to establish in the first place. So I think once you've got that level of understanding and acceptance from enough people that you're able to actually establish it as the terms of peace, so that it is a kind of societally accepted law, then you're kind of already half the way there with the evolution by the fact that you've got that far. So I think it's not like I want to reject the evolution work and only focus on the revolution. I just don't want to go the other way and ignore the revolutionary need that may be there and only focus on the evolution, because, as I say, I don't fully trust the evolution. And if I use the slavery example, although there was an evolution of people questioning and criticizing slavery and arguing against it, at a certain point, there was a revolutionary point. I know it's not as simple as that in our history, but let's simplify history a little bit and just say, look, at one point, slavery was actually abolished. It was actually recognized. It went from being something that was considered a legitimate practice on a official level to something that was criminalized on an official level and rightly viewed as a crime. Now, the evolution may have occurred before that. There would have been evolutionary progress before that, and the evolutionary progress didn't finish at that point either. It had to continue after that. There's still people today that practice slavery or agree with slavery, but for the most part, on a societal level, it is recognized as a crime. And I suppose I'm trying to get to that kind of point, but with the non-aggression principle as a whole. We could pick out one thing like rape or slavery or theft or murder, or we could pick out any of these little things. And I suppose I'm saying, look, perhaps we should step back and say, look, all of these individual things have one line of thread in common, one principle that unites them all as being objectively identifiable as crimes. So I suppose that's where I come from with my whole the NAP should be law kind of attitude. Like I say, I'm not even disputing your point about the practical aspects of not winning enough hearts and minds to make it workable. I fully agree with you on that. The only thing I would push back on is I wouldn't abandon the revolution and only trust the evolution, because the problem is there are many forces working against us, and all the time we're trying to wake people up to these principles, there's plenty of forces moving people in the opposite directions. And so I feel like both is needed. And like I say, I know my characterization of the history of slavery is a bit of an oversimplification, but if you look at that as an example of something that throughout humanity's history, there's been an evolutionary change in our attitude towards slavery and what we think of it with regards to its, legitimacy versus criminality. But at a certain point, there had to be a revolutionary moment, a tipping point, if you like, where we as a society declared slavery to be a crime. Like I say, I know it didn't happen quite as cleanly as that. And I'm sure if the Nations of Sanity ever was successful, that wouldn't happen quite as cleanly as I'm laying it out. But that's the basic idea, is saying, yes, we need to move people on an evolutionary process, but I think we also need that kind of revolutionary goal of this is what we're actually aiming for. It's like with the free market thing. Like, I don't have a problem with the free market expressing different ways of organizing our society, including how we deal with law enforcement, but actual law creation, that's where I'm like, whoa. It's like, for me, the law is the non-aggression principle and end of story kind of thing. And while there's still the book is still open with regards to interpretations and grey areas and approaches, just like the free market can obviously help us find the best way to live. Like, for example, we could all live in a commune, or we could all live in a free market, more traditional capitalist, competition kind of style society. If they're both in line with the non-aggression principle, then they both fit in line with what's legitimate. Now, you could argue that both would be operating under what you call a free market, because they're both competing under merit and neither are being forced through a state and all the rest of it. But for me, that's my point about the free market. For me, a truly free market has to be defined like you almost need the non-aggression principle as the terms of peace, as the law recognized as such, to have the free market, to function on that. Because the problem is and there are, if you don't define the free market that way, and then the market becomes something that can step outside of and therefore violate the non-aggression principle, then, as we've seen in the past, things like slavery, drug laws, there are incentive for those things once coercion is on the table. If you take non-aggression principle violations off the table, if you basically say, look, no, the only legitimate way to work is within the realms of the non-aggression principle, within the realms of our rights as self-owning individuals, and then we go from there. And that there's still plenty of discussion and debate over the best way to do things, and and how we approach it. And I've spoken to, like, as well as yourself, I've spoken to people like Walter Block about different ways that private courts would arbitrate things and what would be the best way to do it. Would you want like a community collective? Would you want like security organizations with different private court systems that have deals with each other? Or there's all sorts of ways to do it, and those are details that are not unimportant, because even a free society can be anywhere between awful and great. But what defines it as a free society, first and foremost, is what we have to get right. Like, for me, that's our step one. And that is the non-aggression. Like, the only thing that has to be the case is the non-aggression principle has to be the terms of peace and how we define law and crime. And anything else we have, like, we can still have collectives that have other rules. You know, like when you were saying about like some people don't want freedom. Well, again, there's a bit of a contradiction into them. Like, I don't want to be free. It's like, well, if they believe in their freedom to make that choice, you know what I mean? You know, because they can be part of some collective and give their autonomy, you know, and give, you know, and delegate their choice over things to other people and all the rest of it, become part of the democracy and give up to that and all the rest of it. But they're still exercising their freedom to do that. You know what I mean? So there's a certain, when we talk about freedom, rights and morality, there's a certain coherence that's demanded there. That means that, like, that's why I'm resistant to the idea of having a free market system where people can just create laws that can step outside the non-aggression principle. Because for me, once they do that, and this was where I had the disagreement with David Friedman over how he defined anarcho-capitalism, because I'm like, you've got to draw a line somewhere, because, you know, if we lived in the, like, communist Russia, wouldn't be considered an anarcho-capitalist society for obvious reasons. But for me, his anarcho-capitalist society that allows drug laws and slavery to go on as a legitimate practice, like, I'm not saying crimes can never occur, but they would have to be recognized as crimes, not viewed as legitimate practices. And if things like drug laws and stuff exist as recognized legitimate things, then it's not anarcho-capitalist any more than the authoritarian communist government is anarcho-capitalist, because it's violating the same underlying principle that would, you know, that would define the property rights and the self-ownership and everything that underpins what anarcho-capitalism, at least in my mind, what anarcho-capitalism is and what a free market is. Like, a market where drug laws and slavery is legitimate is not a free market. It's like the market we have today that's got taxation and all these other things that violate the non-aggression principle. For it to be a free market, it needs the non-aggression principle as the kind of like, it's the only rule. You know, everything else is up for us to negotiate and debate. But the one non-negotiable for me is the non-aggression principle. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I would like to at first react on that slavery stuff, as you were talking about.
Yeah,
I think it's a great example, but I also think that we both are reading the history in some different way, because I think that the point of every change is the evolution, and sometimes it's followed by the revolution, sometimes even not. But the slavery is the case where it was done by evolution and then the revolution in the end. But there is a lot of stuff which were just done by the evolution only. But I think there is nothing which is done just by the revolution only. I think that that the real important or good society changes are always done by evolution, and then there is open ending. Like, when the evolution come to a certain point, then it come more, or there can be revolutionary jump. But I think that without the evolution, there is nothing. You just can't do any change only by the revolution, but you can do a lot of changes only by evolution. And I think that the changes where are the revolutionary acts visible were always just such a dot after the evolution. It was just the let's say finishing of the evolution. So even with the slavery, I feel it as 90 or more % evolutionary act, and then it was finished by the revolution. It was finished by some war, and I think that if it wouldn't be like that, let's say it would happen like in the United States, there would be slavery ended, but somewhere else there wouldn't be. Because if it would always just depend on the revolution can be done or can fail. But you can see that the slavery was here for many thousand years on all the world, and then in just, let's say, 200 years or even less, it was just abolished almost everywhere. And I just don't believe that this would be the result of revolutions, because it would be really big coincidence that for many thousand years, there was no successful anti-slavery revolution, and then just in one moment there would be a lot of anti-slavery revolution all over the world, just independently. I don't see it like this. So I really see it like the slavery was abolished by evolution, and the revolution was just one last moment of the long evolution. And if there wouldn't be the revolutionary, it even wasn't like that everywhere. In United States, the revolution was really bloody, and the Civil War wasn't only about the slavery. The southern part, they wanted the slaves, but the northern part just wanted the Union. So I wouldn't even call it like it was the Civil War was only about the slavery, because I think it wasn't. There was a lot of causes, and in other countries there wasn't even needed a civil war. Somewhere was just changed laws or so on. So I believe that slavery is a nice example of that. The evolution is the power, and the revolution is sometimes the finish of it, but sometimes not even that. And so this is the reason why, as I see when I look at the history of the slavery, it is making me believe that the only way how to abolish the state is the evolution, even if the last step somewhere may be revolutionary. And this is also the reason why I'm focusing only on the evolution and not of the revolution at all, because I think that if the revolution will be needed, it will just come. It just will happen. But the evolution is the process which have to be finished. And if the last step would be revolution or the last step wouldn't be revolution, I think it doesn't matter. And I think that we are still in very early part of that evolution. So to be working on the revolution in our lives, I am afraid that it can be more harmful than helpful. Because if I read some letters which were written by the abolitionists of the slavery much before it happened. And they were such crazy people like anarchists today. Like they were talking about the rights of the people, even if, as you can see now, like we need the state and the people need the state, otherwise they would, I don't know, perish in chaos. The same was with the abolitionists about the slavery. They were saying that they are people and they need their freedom, and the majority of society was saying like, no, they are just animals. You can't let them free. And I feel very strong analogy here between these two stuff. And I believe that if somebody would try to do the revolution 100 or 200 years earlier than it really happened, it would be just bloody massacre with no good result. Because I believe that you first have to have the time in which the people, at least a lot of them, realize that the slavery is not legitimate, and then you can do revolution. Because if you do revolution in the moment where most of people think that the slaves are just animals, you just make some war, you can massacre some people, but you won't free anybody. And I think it's very similar with the libertarianism. And about the free market, I agree with you that you can't have free market without non-aggression principle, because without non-aggression principle, it is a market, but it's not free market. Free market it is where you have the non-aggression principle. But I think that the only way how to get to the non-aggression principle is the market. Like, you have the market of law. The market is not free from the beginning, but it's becoming freer and freer, because I believe that this is the attribute of the market.
But isn't that a chicken and the egg kind of problem, though, with regards to, like, if you agree that the free market needs the non-aggression principle to be the free market, but we need the free market to get the non-aggression principle.
I'm not saying this. I'm saying that you need the market to get to it. You said, and I think it's correct, that without non-aggression principle you have a market, but it's not free market.
Right. Okay.
Free market it is with the non-aggression principle. What I'm saying is that you can have market with law. The market from the beginning is not so much free, but the market is getting freer and freer, because
I see.
Because I believe that the market is bringing people what they really want, not just free market. Just free market is doing it the best, but any market is basically bringing people what they want and what they need. This is the attribute of market. It's like that. And if the market is not free, it's not ideal, but it's still better than no market at all. And I believe in that. At first, I believe that the market is bringing people what they want, even if it's not completely free market. And I believe that the best law is the non-aggression principle. So from these 2 points, I believe that the market is in the end, market of law is in the end getting freer and freer and getting closer and closer to the non-aggression principle. And I believe to this. At first, I have 2 reasons why I believe this. The first reason is that the freedom and non-aggression principle is equal with negative rights. Negative rights and non-aggression principle are
same thing.
Same thing. The negative rights are compatible to each other. No negative rights is violating any other negative right. However, positive rights doesn't have this, are not like this. Positive rights are in conflict. So if you have positive rights, there are conflicts between them. It means that if you have central law, you can solve the conflicts like you just say how it will be. But if you have decentralized polycentric law, you have to solve the conflicts. And because the people who are enforcing the law wants to earn money rather than be in unnecessary conflicts and shooting themselves, they somehow have to agree on what to do with as less conflicts as possible. So if they will follow these aims, they will be in time getting to negative rights. So I believe that if you let the companies to enforce the law from the bottom, if you let them to have the polycentric law, I think that the polycentric law itself will always converge to the negative rights, because the positive rights are in conflict and the negative rights are not. So I think that the market of the law and market of the law would be decentralized, would be naturally be getting to the negative laws, which means it will be getting to the negative rights, which means it will be getting to the non-aggression principle. I think that the non-aggression principle would be the result of the market, which would be from the beginning not so much free, but it would be freer and freer, and then it will get to basically non-aggression principle. This is the first thing why I think that that the negative rights are compatible and the positive rights are in conflict. So this is why I think that the nature result of law market would be the negative rights, which means non-aggression principle. And the second reason why I believe that is that if you look to the history, to the societies which had the decentralized law, not the central one, it was always converging and getting closer to the non-aggression principle. Not like they would really achieve it, because there are also always some culture exceptions. So, for example, usually it was like, for example, if somebody was cursing you or just verbally attacking you, usually you could attack. You were allowed to strike back, even physically, even if he was just attacking verbally. And such things were usually culture habits or so on. But if you look at the history, where was the law created from the bottom? Let's say when the United States were colonized, or the Middle Age Iceland, or even something like that was in Ireland. Those countries were at the point where had decentralized law built from the bottom. They were somehow slowly getting to the non-aggression principle. So this historical empirical experience, plus my deduction about the negative rights and the free market, make me believe that the market is the source of the market is the source of the non-aggression principle, and the free market is the source of the absolute non-aggression principle. Even if you are right that without the non-aggression principle, the market is not really free, but I believe that the connection is not like that. We should establish the non-aggression principle to get the free market. I believe that we should leave the law to be created by the market, and it would be in the end established by the non-aggression principle. Like I mean, it would create the non-aggressive principle.
I understand what you're saying. Like market forces would basically move it in that direction.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I just first of all, just going back to the evolution versus revolution thing. I mean, I do agree with you about the importance of evolution. Like, I don't think a revolution is possible without any evolution. Yeah, I fully agree with you on that. And to use the slavery example, much of the groundwork for the eventual abolition of slavery, and as I say, and as you say, it's not as black and white and as simple as just abolishing slavery. It didn't happen as cleanly as that. But for simplicity's sake, we'll just say that when slavery was. But my point is even totally agreeing with you about the evolution being like the foundation of that. The actual act of abolishing slavery was the revolutionary act. It may have been at the very end. It may have been the small part of it, and it may not have been possible without the evolution before it. But the reason why I suppose I don't want that revolutionary aspect to be forgotten about is because I feel that the abolition of slavery could have happened long before it did, and it could have happened long after it did. And the evolution of it moving in that direction, it kind of needed that revolutionary act as well, you know what I mean, to actually flip it from one to the other. Because long before slavery was abolished, I have no doubt in my mind there were many people who were against it, just as there are still people who support it long after it's abolished. So even though I totally agree with you with regards to the importance of the evolution, I don't think the revolutionary aspect can be forgotten, because I do think that I can understand why you think it would be a disaster if they attempted it before that. I'm not convinced that's such a certainty. Like, I do think that, and I'm not an expert on history, but I do think that slavery could have been abolished long before it was. I do think that revolution could have occurred. I think not absence of the evolution, but I just feel that the evolution was running for a lot longer. And sometimes also evolution, it's not always a progression. Sometimes we regress. Sometimes our morality goes backwards. I mean, generally we look at history and we think we've moved forward, and I think overall we have. But there has been steps back now and then. I mean, there have been times when, as a society at least, we've taken massive steps back, and things that were once understood to be wrong all of a sudden are allowed, and vice versa. So that's why, like I say, I'm not disagreeing with you per se, certainly not with regards to the importance of evolution. I do agree with that, and as I say, like, I join with people like yourself and Larkin Rose, who's a big name in America, or well, as big as anarchists are, and other people like that who really do focus on the evolution side, really do focus on changing hearts and minds and getting people to make government irrelevant rather than trying to rise up and overthrow them. But at some point, I think we are going to need to rise up and overthrow them. At some point, I think we need to make that revolutionary. I think we need to make the revolution that our evolution is building towards happen at some point. And I think that is something that we could do, because we've had like the slavery thing. And again, I realize it's not as simplistic as we're laying it out, but we've done it with slavery. We've done it with other things like like opposition to things like racism and stuff like that. With regards to, like, on a societal level, kind of having this waking up. And that doesn't mean everybody, just like it didn't mean everybody with the other side of it before that revolutionary turning point. But I just think that we shouldn't forget about that thing we actually want to change. You know what I mean? The other thing about although I appreciate you clarifying what you meant, because I was getting a bit of a chicken and egg thing with the whole free market nap, which has come first kind of thing. But I understand what you're saying about how, and I do agree in part that certainly there's a lot of aspects of market forces, even the market we have today, not necessarily a fully free market, but even the market we have today, that do push us towards freedom, because the market at all is an exercise of choice, which is an exercise of freedom.
Exactly.
But the problem is the coercion that does exist, the NAP violation that does exist, all the ways that it's not free, kind of perverts the course that I think the market would naturally push us to. And just to use an example, I mean, I think I always use drug laws as a great example, for many reasons, apart from the fact that they're a very obvious violation of our rights. But also, it's a good example of how an unfree market can support further violations of our freedom, because the driving forces behind drug laws, although they're obviously enacted by a ruling government, it's a lot of corporate interests that are behind drug laws. Pharmaceutical companies are the obvious beneficiaries to drug laws, because obviously that's drugs they don't have to compete with, patents they can have monopolies over. I mean, no better example than something like cannabis, where you have all of these medicinal uses criminalized, while a small group of companies can have monopolies on what drugs are legalized or allowed. So there is market incentives against freedom if someone's benefiting from a certain violation of freedom. And there are people that benefit. You've got private prisons that will benefit from unjust laws. Pharmaceutical companies obviously benefit from drug laws, as do many other companies. I mean, I don't know how much you know about the history of cannabis, but the companies or the businesses that were behind trying to get cannabis first made illegal included timber companies that didn't want to compete with hemp, and obviously the pharmaceutical companies, and obviously the prison industrial complex, who wanted to continue the prohibition they'd done of alcohol and into other substances. And there's plenty of market incentives to violate our freedom. So that's why I don't want to firmly disagree with you, because I agree with much of I do think you're right in much of what you say. There is a lot of market incentive towards freedom, but I don't think that's an absolute truth. I don't think that we can just trust a unfree market to become a free market. And just like I don't trust, and to be honest, and that parallels my opinion with the evolution revolution thing. I don't think we can trust evolution without at least some consideration for that need for that, what I would class more of a revolutionary act of actually making that fundamental change, like the fundamental change we need or eventually need to make our market that we have today an actual free market that can express how it will. Yes, much of the progress that we're going to get, if we ever get to that point, is helped by the the aspects of the market that we have today in this unfree market. So I do totally agree with your point on that. But I do think that those aspects can also lead us astray if we don't have that change in mind.
I agree with you in this, and I agree that there are even parts of the market which are, as you said, for example, the pharmaceutical companies and so on. On the other hand, you have also here a big black market, and because the drugs are sold anyway, and you can buy drugs, and it's still better and better because it's still work of the market because you have dark markets on the internet. You can buy illegal drugs quite everywhere, and so this is steps towards the freedom. So even if the big pharma companies are have some market incentives to push on governments to ban drugs. On the other hand, there is a lot of markets which are giving people freedom, because a lot of people are taking drugs, and it's illegal, but they are still doing it, and you can usually see the bad examples, because when the person is becoming addicted or something like that, he's going to the hospital. So the society is getting aware of those people who ended bad on drugs because they needed the help. But there is a lot of people who are taking some drugs, like the cannabis is probably the most widespread. But there are even a lot of psychedelics and other drugs which are commonly used by people, and the people, just quite anybody can take drugs in this world. So if you want any drug, you just can go and take it. So I think it's bad that it's for bad prices, it's in lower quality and so on. So but still the market is finding a way to get the people the drugs they want. So
yeah, sorry, go on.
So even if you are right, and I agree with you, I suppose that the market is much more giving the people the freedom than it takes the freedom from them.
Yeah, I mean, that's potentially true, and as I say, like I do, I don't dismiss the value that the market plays in that regard, just like I don't dismiss the value of evolution, with regards to the evolution versus revolution thing. But I suppose that's why I don't trust it fully. That's why I don't just have full faith. I think that's another reason why I separate myself from anarcho-capitalists as a voluntarist who just focuses on the non-aggression principle side of it. Because a lot of anarcho-capitalists have this very kind of trust the market approach. And I'm like, well, I don't just trust the market, particularly if it's not a free market, because I see all the ways that the coercion can spread like a cancer, the corruption incentivizes itself. And, it's like even like you say about the black market and that, but, even that brings its problems by the fact that then the only people that are able to really do proper business with these illegal drugs are the kind of criminal organizations that also deal in a lot of actual crimes, the things that would be crimes, under the non-aggression principle. And good, decent people, I know, for example, I know sick people who have a genuine medicinal requirement for cannabis, who simply cannot afford to supply themselves with cannabis, even though it's something that could, in theory, be supplied to them as cheaply as tomato ketchup, because it's just as cheap and easy to produce. But because it's illegal, because that allows even the black market will sell it at a vastly inflated price, because of the prohibition. then that gives power, like, for example, what happened in Mexico, where the cartels became more powerful than the government, and the cartels aren't exactly nicer than the government. You know what I mean? So this is the problem. Powerful bad people can use that coercion to, that's allowed. The once that's the problem with it. There is that, although I do see all the ways in which, we are incentivized towards freedom, there's plenty of incentivization within an unfree market to keep it an unfree market.
It was very good explanation why you consider yourself more as voluntarist than anarcho-capitalist. This is explanation which I probably like even more than the previous ones when we were talking about it the last time. But I would like to say that I don't fully trust the markets, but I trust them more than people who want to establish something what they consider as good from the top. So I can't say I always trust the market, and I don't even think that if we would have here the market, that we would reach the society which would be completely under the non-aggression principle. Because basically, I don't believe that it is possible to build a society which would be completely working according to the non-aggression principle. I believe that this is some ideal, and it's good to try to get to the ideal, but I don't believe it's reachable. But I think we can get close to it, and I trust that the market is the way how to do that. However, I wouldn't say I always trust the market that it will be done perfectly or good. But I think it's the best way I can see, because I absolutely don't trust the attempts of do something from the top to the bottom. I always trust the way from the bottom to the top. And when somebody comes with some idea, which I even consider as good, for example, your non-aggression principle, or there are people who, for example, they are my biggest the thing I'm the most studying and talking about of anarcho-capitalist is the education system. And I have some ideas about how the education system should look like. I have some favorite education models and so on. But every time when somebody comes with this model, like, let's make it from the top, let's go to the ministry and make it for everybody, I don't like it. I don't like it, even if the systems are good for me, and even if I am, even if it's my favorite education model, I don't think it's good to take it and somehow push it centralizedly from the top to the bottom. I trust the different way, and here it is the same, because I don't think that the market is able to do everything correct and all right. But on the other hand, I think this is the best what we have here, and I'm just really afraid of when somebody's even with some good ideas say that, hey, I have some really good idea, and people should understand this idea, and we should somehow implement it to the society, because I'm afraid that even if, for example, when I see you, I absolutely believe that you mean it good, and I'm sure that the thing you want is very similar to the thing I want, but I'm afraid that if you would have the chance to do it, to implement it to the society, I very strongly believe that it would fail, even if I trust you, and even if I trust the thought, even if I trust that you are a good person, even if I trust all those things, I believe that if you would try to put it as a universal law from the top to the bottom, I believe it would fail. So this is what I think. I think it was a really nice conversation. I probably like it maybe even more than the previous ones. And if you are okay with that, I would probably end it here. But if you want to say something more, definitely we can. But for me, I start to feel that at first it's very hot here in the studio because I have here the lights, and I'm quite burning here. But also it's quite a long time English talking for me, so my head is getting a bit sick. So I would like to push it somehow to the end, but I don't want to cut it. So whatever you want to say, feel free to continue.
No, I mean, well, I think we can finish up. I mean, I'll sort of finish off just by sort of saying I understand your concerns and kind of share them to a certain degree. I suppose the one difference I have, which is again similar to my disagreement with David Friedman over the whole anarcho-capitalism thing, is it's not the centralization, although I often do prefer a decentralized process to things. I do think that's often the better way of doing it. It's not the centralization aspect that I think is the fundamental problem. It's the coercion. So, like, I agree with you when you were talking about these educational ideas, and then someone says, "Oh, well, let's take it to the minister and have it forced down on all that," and you're like, "No, that's ruining it immediately." I would agree with you that ruins it immediately, but for me, what ruins it is the coercion involved, the fact that it would be forced on people rather than it being centralized. Like, I can see collectives operating in some kind of central management way, although rarely do I think that's the optimum way to go. But I can envisage scenarios in which that would be, like, for example, a unified understanding of the terms of peace, the law, the non-aggression principle, for example. But it's when it steps outside. I mean, that's why I kind of view the non-aggression principle not just as something that we need to kind of, have as sitting at the top, if you like, but for me, by its definition, it's the only thing that's allowed to be there, because it's prohibiting anything else from being there, including anything that would mask itself as itself that violates it. It's like it's like the rule or like the only thing that rules over us is the demand that no one's allowed to rule over us, kind of thing, but including each other, like.
I agree with you that the problem is the coercion and not the centralization, like theoretically, but in the reality, I think that the coercion and centralization are very strongly connected, as well as the decentralization and the liberty. I think that these things are absolutely connected in reality, even if theoretically I have problem with coercion and not decentralization on the theoretical level. And what I really want is freedom and liberty, not necessarily decentralization. But I think that the centralization is absolutely strongly connected with coercion, and the decentralization is somehow allowing the liberty or freedom to be created, to be lived.
Yeah, no, I agree. And to be fair to David Friedman's position, like, he did say, he doesn't think that an anarcho-capitalist society is likely to have drug laws and slavery. He just says that it would be allowed within the definition, whereas, like, my stance is no, we need to define it in a way that doesn't allow for those things, and kind of and step forward from there. So yeah, but I think I really enjoyed that conversation. I think the foundation that we lay from our previous conversations allows us to have more interesting conversations, because we don't have to do all the groundwork. We've already got a lot of definitions out the way, and we can delve in. So I've really enjoyed it, and look forward to having another conversation with you in the future.
So thank you very much. I also thank to all the viewers who gave us their attention, and have a nice day, and I really thank you for good thoughts. I have a lot to think about now. So bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.